look at what you have spent your attention on. Not what you have built. Not what you have accomplished. What you have been watching. The thing you oppose. The person you resent. The quality in others that produces in you the specific, reliable sensation of contempt. Friedrich Nietzsche was the first philosopher to document the transformation that sustained opposition produces, not as moral philosophy, as a clinical observation about what happens to a person when their identity is organized around what they are against. He called it ressentiment, and his most disturbing finding was not about the enemy. It was about the person doing the opposing. The more completely you define yourself against something, the more completely that thing begins to define you, not through defeat, through attention. Nietzsche introduced the concept of resentment in On the Genealogy of Morality, not as a criticism of individuals, as a diagnosis of a psychological structure, a way of relating to the world that begins in legitimate opposition, a real injustice, a real antagonist, a real quality in others that is genuinely in opposition to your own, and in somewhere the person did not intend to arrive. The mechanism is specific. When a person organizes their identity around what they are against, when the definition of who they are becomes inseparable from the definition of what they oppose, they enter into a particular relationship with the object of their opposition, one of sustained, involuntary attention. The enemy is watched, studied, returned to. The behavior of the enemy is tracked, their successes, their failures, their qualities, their methods. This tracking is experienced as opposition. It is also, in a way the person rarely acknowledges, a form of education. Nietzsche's observation, the person who stares long enough at a thing begins to take on its qualities. Not through admiration, through the structural influence of sustained, high-effect attention. The enemy's methods become familiar. The enemy's logic becomes legible. The enemy's values, examined in sufficient detail and with sufficient intensity, begin to find their way into the person's own operating system, and disguised always as their opposite, as the righteous counter-move, as the justified response. I am not like them. I am doing what is necessary. The difference is that I have a reason. The difference is that I am right. Nietzsche called this the slave revolt in morality, the moment at which the opposition to power begins to replicate the structure of power. In the name of opposing it. The enemy did not win. The enemy was copied. And the person doing the copying has the most elaborate explanation for why what they are doing is completely different. Nietzsche documented this mechanism across his analysis of moral systems, but the most precise examination of how it operates at the individual level is in his concept of ressentiment, drawn from French because German had no word adequate to the specific quality of feeling he was describing. Ressentiment is not resentment in the ordinary sense. It is not the sharp, temporary experience of injustice. It is the state of a person whose entire orientation toward the world has been organized around a fixed opposition, an enemy, a quality, a person, a system that they cannot defeat and cannot stop attending to. The enemy has become the primary referent of the self. The person does not know who they are without the opposition. Remove the enemy, and the identity collapses. The opposition is not what they are fighting. It is what is holding them together. This is Nietzsche's first and most important observation about the transformation. The enemy is not just opposed. The enemy is depended upon. The second example is closer. Research on moral outrage consistently produces a finding that contradicts its own participants. The people who are most consistently and most intensely focused on a particular form of wrongdoing, who track it, catalog it, respond to every instance of it with full force, tend over time to adopt the tactics of the thing they are opposing. The activist who becomes authoritarian in pursuit of liberation. The person who leaves a controlling relationship and gradually recreates its structure in the next one, this time from the other side. The group that forms an opposition to an ideology and within a generation produces the ideology it formed to oppose. We are different. We have reasons. The difference is the justification. We are doing the same thing, but for the right side. Nietzsche's framework says the justification is the last thing to change. The methods change first. The values change second. The justification is maintained longest because it is the thing the person's identity requires most. The third example is the one with no remaining distance. Think about the quality in a specific person that produces your most reliable contempt. The quality you have watched most closely, whose expression in that person's behavior you have cataloged, commented on, returned to, whose presence in a room produces in you the specific quality of alertness that opposition generates. Now think about the last time you expressed a version of that quality yourself, not the same version, not with the same justification, a version of it, in a context where you were not watching yourself the way you watch them. The quality you most reliably identify in others is the quality you have spent the most time studying, and the quality you have spent the most time studying is the quality you are most in danger of becoming fluent in. Think about what you have been fighting, not abstractly. Specifically, the person whose behavior has organized a significant portion of your attention over a significant period of time. The quality in others that produces your most consistent negative response. The thing you have defined yourself against. In a relationship, in a professional context, in the way you understand your own identity. Now apply Nietzsche's question. What have you learned from watching it? Not what you have concluded about it. What you have learned. The specific knowledge you have accumulated about how it operates, what conditions it requires, what it produces in the people around it, how effective it is at getting what it wants. I know exactly how this works. I have watched it long enough to understand the mechanism completely. I know what it does and how it does it and why it works. Nietzsche's framework asks, what have you done with that knowledge? The person who has studied a thing long enough to understand it completely is not in a position of pure opposition to it. They are in possession of it. Think about the relationship in your life where you were most clearly in the position of opposition, where you were responding to a quality in another person that you found genuinely intolerable. And think about whether, at any point in that opposition, you used a version of the method you were opposing, for a different reason, in response to what they did first, as a necessary response to the specific situation, not like them, not motivated by the same thing, but the method, stripped of its justification, looked the same from the outside. Nietzsche's framework says the justification is not the relevant variable. The method is the relevant variable. The method is what the person becomes, not through intention. Through the sustained, high-effect practice of deploying it. Look at what you have spent your attention on. Nietzsche's question is not whether you are aware of the transformation. It is whether you can trace the line. From the first moment of opposition to where you are standing now, and recognize the shape you have taken on in the process. Nietzsche did not believe resentment was inevitable. He believed it was the default outcome of opposition that has not been examined. And the distinction between the inevitable and the default is the only useful one available. The default continues until something interrupts it. The interruption is not a decision to stop opposing. Nietzsche had no interest in the withdrawal of opposition. He had no patience for the moral systems that counseled forgiveness and release as the path away from resentment. He thought those systems were themselves expressions of resentment, dressed differently. The interruption he described was something harder. The examination of the specific ways in which the opposition has shaped the person doing the opposing. Not what they believe about the enemy, what they have become in the act of opposing. Nietzsche's concept of self-overcoming, what he called Selbstüberwindung, is not the overcoming of weakness. It is the overcoming of the specific shape that sustained opposition has given you. The person who can see clearly what they have taken on, what methods they have absorbed, what values they have adopted in the guise of countering them, is in the only position from which genuine opposition is possible, not the opposition that replicates the enemy, the opposition that requires the person to become something the enemy's logic cannot account for. This requires a precision of self-examination that most people decline, because it requires looking not at what the enemy has done, but at what the person has done in response, at what they have justified, at what methods they have used that, stripped of justification, are indistinguishable from the methods they opposed. Nietzsche's warning is not that you should be more like your enemy. It is that you already are, in specific ways, in the ways that sustained attention always produces, and that the only form of opposition worth maintaining is the kind that begins with knowing exactly what shape the fight has given you. You do not become your enemy by losing. You become them by fighting long enough, without ever looking at what the fighting has made you. And there is another structure, more personal, more interior, that Nietzsche documented with equal precision, the way a person builds their own prison, not through weakness, through the specific, repeated choice of constraints they claim to oppose, the freedom that is available and not taken, the door that stands open and is not walked through, and the story the person tells about why the door is actually closed. Why you always choose your own prison. That is next.